Welcome to another free-to-play review right here at the Digital Creative Front. As today we take the time to look at Blade & Soul by Team Bloodlust at NCSoft. Okay, so how we do this here is, I first give a description of the game, then I go into the more technical or design elements of it all, the bads, the goods, along with things one will either like or dislike about the title, and then to try to keep this to the point, we are off to wrap this all up with the verdict. My final verdict, for those of you that don't know, is derived from 3 scores. Those scores include a fan score, which is the score the game should deserve from the perspective of those that are into the title's genre or themes. A general score, also known as a score for gamers that might not necessarily be fans of the genre or theme of the title, and lastly my own personal score and why I generally liked or disliked the game. What is Blade & Soul? Blade & Soul is a Korean-based MMO which was finally this year released in US and Europe. I'm going to completely try and ignore the fact that the name constantly reminds me of Soul Blade, one of the names to Soul Calibur before it became as we knew it as Soul Calibur. As one would expect from most Korean developed MMOs, this is an action-heavy oriented game, and that is a good thing. Along with other things one can expect from such MMOs, it has a heck ton of crazy wackery when it comes to the item and loot system. What I mean by this is, for those of you that have not yet experienced such titles, is that these developers usually enjoy creating about a dozen or more different currencies and crafting systems within crafting systems, where you end up upgrading the weapon from the shard of the weapon that was a magic rock which you extracted from a weapon with the extraction tools you crafted from other rocks. Well, not really, not exactly like that, but you get what I mean. Surprisingly, this isn't too hard to catch on with in Blade & Soul, and you don't end up being overwhelmed as much as some other like-minded titles out there. Suffice to say, it still has its own unique way of doing things, and to be honest, although not too crazy, it did become a little too much for me to completely be able to indulge in some things, such as the crafting system for example. The game is, as I said, action-oriented, and it involves a lot of Kwingyong, I think it's called, if I'm saying it right. Basically, that is a fantasy-like movement system where you're pretty much running on water ponds, double jumping in the air, dashing in the air, gliding in the air, as well as some other stuff which I have to admit look pretty damn cool, like this dragon breath thingy here, which allows you to apparently ride some dragon's breath and fly around the map in an instance. The game has a level cap at 50, great graphics, okay voiceovers for the most part, with the downside of a couple of Bieber looking NPCs and female armors that are designed to give female characters wedgies and cover the nipples alone. Which could be a complaint for some gamers, but to be fair, I have seen a lot worse. Terra, and again, to be fair, the males are portrayed as hunky counterparts to the females as well, so it goes both ways and the double standard for the most part is taken care of. The world design is that of, well, I'd like to say mythical and the historical East? Land of the Orient or something? There was so much in this game that reminded me of Japanese designs more than Korean, to be honest. Not that there are none of the latter as well. It's just that for me it felt in some occasions much more Japanese. This is completely subjective with regards to the actual direction of the design, but for me personally this was a good thing. The combat is solid, although a little advanced I would say for some players out there, as it really does pitch in a heavy combo system into the game. Along with combos, you can also pair up your attacks with other players nearby, at which point it could again, for some, become a little overwhelming. It felt at times rather like those combo-heavy action games like Devil May Cry or what have you, which again, for me at least, this is not a bad thing. The game also allows you to respec your skills at any given time, which allows you to experience the combat in many different forms, whether they be much more dungeon oriented, PvP oriented, or just for, you might say, exploring. The story so far seems pretty intriguing enough, though I wouldn't hold my breath too much for it, and as always with most of these games, it is sprinkled with some over-the-top cheesiness from time to time. And that is pretty much the core of it all on a first look. It isn't something completely new, but it does do the things it aims for quite right, whilst the design of the game, for my liking, was quite pleasant indeed. Some of the simpler choices, for example, that the game includes, such as outfits not affecting your armor, hence being a matter of appearance and which one you like best, are some of the new and fresh aspects that I enjoyed to this game. I could really babble on about a lot of these details, but the short of it all is that I was quite captivated by most of the design elements and decisions made in this game, along with the combat system and its fluency. Now for the technical, the good, the bad and the ugly. The graphics, coupled with the art design, result in a very pleasant game. It's probably not among the best graphics around, but I found hardly anything I would personally change to make it better. It simply all just fits. Even the lighting in certain maps is just simply captivating. Sound is also top notch, combined with a really captivating soundtrack, which was also, I would say, quite soothing to the ears with all the wonderful Eastern themed melodies it is sprinkled with. The single player is straightforward and relatively easy, with quest hubs being less tiring than some other games of the genre out there and with less than usual back and forth going on about it. Dungeons are pretty much what you would expect from a title like this, whilst the PvP is something I have not had the pleasure of exploring too much of just yet. The game also includes an open world PvP system that players can take part of at any time by choice, which is pretty cool. This is available through wearing a certain faction outfit that will dub you PvP rating. All members of an opposing faction will obviously attack on sight. This, from what I gathered from some older gamers in there, is also something players hardly indulge in, leaving the proper PvP arenas and whatnot as the main course meal for those into this kind of an experience. It feels as if there are some cumbersome moments here and there in the design of the game, whether it be a certain quest that involves using a certain item at a certain location, or getting used to the portals, gateways in certain dungeon areas that can become a little confusing in some map layouts. Or all that crafting and loot system that I mentioned before. But for the most part, the game flows from the start quite fluently. The tutorial of it all is placed into a storyline that takes place simultaneously to everything else, and elements of the game are unlocked in a linear fashion that keep it fresh all the way up to level 20, not throwing too much at you at once on the one hand, and on the other, giving you always something new here and there to add to your experience. More on the important aspects to the game. Quests are pretty normal, with the usual kill X amount of enemies being the core of them. However, as per normal with such a game, these quests are just fine, since the combat that takes place is quite fun. As a matter of fact, some of us could probably be left wanting even more of such quests to further enjoy the game. There are little things like world bosses and some small events, from which the game has taken some pointers from Guild Wars 2, with the auto party system. On a last note with regards to gear, the game uses a soul shield system that you get used to early on, where you equip soul shields as the equivalent to armors which are missing in the game, thus making up for them and making the experience more complete. As a free-to-play title, I had no problem whatsoever roaming about doing my thing without feeling in one way or another restricted, aside from some really small things like not being able to whisper, I think, below a certain level, or trade. The second of which is probably irrelevant to the free-to-play mechanics of the game, but I could be wrong. What I mean is that maybe that trading restriction is something that occurs for everybody, subscription or for free. Anyway, I noticed no such pay-to-win mechanics hidden and lurking in any corner of the game, and all seems to work just fine aside from a constant reminder of your ability to become a subscribed player. Subscriptions add things like loot spaces and some account conveniences, but do not affect the overall experience of the game, which is again a really good thing. As with most MMOs, surely the details that can be covered in them are many, but like I mentioned at the start of the video, And again, for those of you that may be seeing these videos for the first time, we do things here in a get-to-the-point kind of fashion, and at the same time, leave the little details out of the review for your own experience and pleasure. So to keep it short and to the point, that is all I can say to sum this game up pretty much. Aside from some of these general game directions I mentioned, it doesn't have, to be honest, too many completely new and innovative elements to it. It's pretty bread and butter as far as MMOs go from there on. What I do take from all this, however, is that it does things right, and that is always what we are looking for. The game may seem at times to lack a certain game mechanic, but in reality makes up for it with another, like having no mounts, which is really pointless with the movement system present in the game, allowing you to pretty much fly wherever you want, or the lack of armor loot, which is replaced with soul shields, and thus allows armors to be completely a visual aspect of the game. This in fact actually helps the game look always good, since even your very first attire looks quite decent. The game feels surprisingly polished, and in my 30 hours or so in it, I must have experienced 2, maybe a maximum of 3 latency issues with the server. Aside from that, all is in the right place and working. As a free-to-play account, you have access to 2 character creation slots, which is the bare minimum for any free-to-play game in my opinion, so it's marginally just okay. As always with my MMO reviews, I'm not going into endgame content for this review, because that is, as it says itself, endgame content, and I'm kinda old school like that. If a game is not good before the endgame content, then there is no reason to waste one's valuable time on it, and I simply wouldn't recommend it. Such excuses the likes of "it gets better later on" mean nothing to me ultimately, as I would never recommend someone waste 30 hours of their life to get to the "it gets better later on" part of the game, much less do it for multiple characters. As for the games that I do recommend, if a game is good but has little endgame content, then players simply ended up experiencing a great game and are free to move on to another title. Or if they enjoyed it so much, play it again. Like I said, I'm old school like that and old fashioned, and I don't bother with reaching endgame content when forming an opinion on a title for a review. Neither see it as a reason to play a game, period. If the game ain't what it should be in its first dozen of hours, then really, there is little reason to go through it just to be rewarded in the end with something better. It's a game. We are, after all, to begin with, playing just for our entertainment. So for those of you that endgame content is the most important aspect to an MMO, I hate to disappoint, but my verdict does not account for it, and it's something you will have to experience on your own. The verdict. Blade & Soul really does it right for gamers that like most of the Korean-based action MMOs. Its movement mechanics really bring a fresh taste to the table, and the game lacks in little areas as far as I'm concerned for the genre. It blends some simpler elements here and there from other MMOs, like the auto party system, but doesn't beat us over the head with such systems, and it really creates an overall formula that fits. From the perspective of a target group that will be into this kind of game, I wouldn't give Blade & Soul anything under 8 out of 10. Thus the target group verdict comes to 8 out of 10. Players on the other hand that are not into this kind of action-based MMOs, there is a lot here regardless to enjoy in other areas as long as you get used to the controls and the idea of it. Meanwhile, players that are not into MMOs but like action-based games, the combat system is quite solid, and this could become their first title to bring them into the genre. Visuals are, as I said, quite wonderful, the game is welcoming and polished, and there is little it does wrong for any gamer. Except for those that hate MMOs, they hate action games, and they hate Korean-based MMOs as well, or a blend of all the above. For everybody else, the game is pretty good, and I would have to give it a score of a 7 out of 10. Now for my score. For me, this title was such a fresh breath of air. I am more often than not turned off by 9 out of 10 Korean-based MMOs. The combat systems feel repetitive, sometimes wrong, and when they do get them right, which they do quite often, they are usually not something completely new to surprise me. The designs are usually over-sexualized, and I can't say a lot of the time that I am a fan of a lot of the art direction in most of those titles either. The loot systems, daily systems, reward currencies, and crafting systems in most of those titles also annoy me beyond belief. Blade & Soul, however, came to me as a surprise. The combat captivated me and finally gave me something new to indulge in. At least that is how I felt when I was playing this title. The loot systems are great so far, the movement mechanics are simply amazing in my opinion, and who needs a mount when you can fly, right? Lastly, the design of the world. I really love it. It reminds me a lot of some older Japanese games I had played years ago, even though this is a Korean developer, and comes with this strange nostalgia in it for me. Among those titles that the style reminds me of are Tenku, Onimusha, Otogi, and Ronin Blade, among others, all of which were games that I truly loved growing up. The world is, in my opinion, one of the most important things that will make me in the long run either stay in a certain MMO or leave. And Blade and Soul kept me so satisfied, feeling fresh and addicted within the very first 10 minutes. I almost expected to have enough of this title in the first hour or so, and yet there I was, 30 hours later, with a smile on my face every time I launched into the game to enjoy me some Dragon Breath jumping, super wacky combo systems, and a world that I fell for at first sight. 9 out of 10. And thus, the final verdict comes to 8 out of 10. If you've played Blade and Soul, let me know in the comments, what did you think of it? Do you agree with this score, or was this title really just a complete miss for you? As always, if you enjoyed this review, please hit the thumbs up button, and if you like our videos, don't forget to subscribe for more right here on the Digital Creative Front. This was Hazard Reborn, and I'll see you next time.